Hello and welcome to False Allegation Radio. Today we have Mark with us. So, good morning, Mark. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, good. So, where do you come from? Because that's not a UK accent, is it?
No, I am born in Jersey in the Channel Islands. I moved to Australia when I was 26 years old. I lived there for just under 22 years. And I now find myself back in Jersey in the Channel Islands.
All right, okay. So, obviously, you're here on False Allegation Radio today to talk about the false allegations that you've suffered. But before, obviously, you got into this murky world of false allegations, can you tell me what life was like for you before this all happened?
Generally speaking, I had a bit of a wayward childhood. The usual, in trouble with police and whatnot. I was lucky enough to meet an Australian girl who worked for my father. We moved she wanted to return to Australia and I emigrated there. We lived in Perth, Western Australia.
Oh, nice.
Our marriage didn't last long. Truth be told, I was probably even at 26 or 27, still too immature to be married.
Sure.
But I decided to stay in Australia and make a life for myself in Perth. That was very, very hard, but an extremely difficult place to meet people. But I persevered and did build a good life for myself. I worked in the drilling industry or the mining industry and got injured. I went back as a mature age student to study, which was quite a revelation for me, given I was in remedial for some of my classes at school. Did very well and worked in the safety and health industry. And in November 2003, I set up as a consultant, a safety and health consultant, and did very, very well. And I had a nice life, working FIFO or fly in, fly out.
Yeah.
And built myself a home. And I ended up, my mum was dying of lung cancer halfway around the world. And at that time, I was probably quite needy. And I met my son's mother, and it all happened incredibly quickly. And within 7 months of meeting her, within 2 months of meeting her, she was pregnant. And within 7 months, we'd broken up.
Wow.
And I basically had limited access to my son during his first year. It was always at his mum's house mostly. I never really had him on his own. And then she consented. Sounds bizarre because, it's both of our sons, but she consented to let me have him on his own. And then we had a bad handover, and then my access was withdrawn, and then that's when it all really started to go wrong. I had to go to mediation, and I got limited time, so I applied in the family court to get more time. And after maybe a year, that's when the false allegations came out.
So you say you had a bad handover. Was that like just frustration bubbling over on your part, or was that something that she'd done, or was it just the circumstances that you was both in at the time just sort of pushed you to that point?
That's an interesting one. We both had our own cars. I picked up Tom, ready to take him. And I can't remember why, but then all of a sudden things got fractious, and I said, well, it is my time. So, I put Tom in the baby seat, drove off, and as I took him to a local park, and I got a phone call from the police saying that I'd abducted my son.
Wow.
And he was very young then. He was maybe 13 months old. So I had him in my arms, and I said to the policeman, look, I've got my son. I need to focus on him. I'm not being rude. He's fine. This is my time. There's nothing wrong with him. He will be handed over at the said time. and I'm going to terminate the call now because my son was started getting antsy and crying, and I said, as you can hear, because I'm not devoting time to him, he's upset. So I need to go. He will be handed over at the time and place that we agreed. And I hung up. Now my mind went into overdrive, and I thought, so I ended up texting his mum and handing them over early. And as I remember this as if it was yesterday, as I could feel something was coming. So as I had him, I used to carry my son all the time because I didn't see him that much. So his head was always level with mine. And I remember speaking into his ear saying, whatever happens, Boo, Daddy will always love you. Never forget that. Because I thought that I may not see him again. And when we handed him over, he was standing on my knees as I was sitting in the car playing with the steering wheel, and he had a big grin. And then his mum came along, and he was happy to see her as well. And then when she took him, she said, "You're never going to see your son again." And that's when I got a letter from her lawyer, her first lawyer, which really shocked me because until that time I was probably quite naive, and that letter. It was really like a character assassination,
Yeah, are they always?
Pretty much. There's nothing objective. It tells you everything that you've done wrong, and generally you haven't done anything wrong anyway. Very, very shocked. So that started the mediation process. I didn't see my son for 2 months at that time.
So, okay. What are the circumstances then that actually led to you being falsely accused?
Well, it really stems from trying to get more access to my son in the family court of Western Australia. So, I kind of flippantly say we I was in the court so much I should have got frequent flyer miles and really should have just got my own parking space. In such a short space of time, we were always in there. And just when you thought you might get traction and common sense would prevail, it'd be like, right, we'll adjourn and then we'll have another proceeding hearing. And as everyone who's listening to this will know that scenario. And I just sense that there came a time when maybe things, I don't want to say would swing in my favour. I think I should, would have swung into what I should have got as a father, more near equal time with my son. My rosters were such that I wouldn't be able to do 50-50, and I knew that, and I accepted that.
Yeah.
But if I worked 8 days on and then 6 days off, I could have quite easily had, Tom for those 6 days. But I never had him for an overnight. And there just came a time, I remember getting a letter from my son's mother's new lawyer, and they basically said, your son won't be presented for contact, and you're not to contact my client. And as it happens, we were in court not long after, so I raised this with the registrar, and he asked why, and the other party said, we're not at liberty to say. So they gave the party a month to sort themselves out. When we went back in, the judge said, right, have we resolved the issues? And they said, no, we're not going to present the boy for access. And he looked at me and said, right, you go to the Department of Child Protection and tell them that you're being prevented from seeing your son. And that's when they said, we are investigating the father for allegations of sexual abuse. And this was on April the 1st, 2010, would you believe? So the joke was on me. And I had to get in contact with the policeman who was the specialist detective who was dealing with the allegations. That's really, if I was to say in a sentence what brought about the false allegations, it was just me pushing for increased access to my son.
Yeah, and do you know what? That absolutely, Mark, is a very common theme. I'm not here to talk about me and my story. I've put my story out there, but something that struck a chord with me when you said it started to swing in my favour, that's when things changed. And if you've listened to what I said about mine, it was as soon as things changed and it looked like the balance of power was starting to shift, came the first allegation. And I say that, and you say that, but no matter who I speak to now, everybody seems to have this same story, that it ultimately it comes down to the fact that if the and forgive me, I'm going to use the word woman, and I appreciate it's not always women, but if the woman feels like she's losing whatever the particular situation is that she's in, it's almost like, right, well, what can I do to hurt this person? What have I got left to drop on them? Here's the biggest bomb I've got, let's go for it. And it always seems to be when they're on the back foot, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely. And I call the false allegations the trump card. It is absolutely the trump card that a respondent can play. And
I actually referred to it as a nuclear option, because once that gets dropped, nobody survives it. The children don't survive it. The man doesn't survive it. Potentially the person who makes the allegation survives it, but they're always looking over their shoulder. You and I spoke off air a minute ago, and we said, didn't we, that these people who make these false allegations don't seem to be able to move on. They seem to be absolutely focused on vengeance and revenge, and they can't move on because they're now living this massive lie that if it ever came out and they ever got caught properly, the chance is, even if they don't get in trouble with the law for it, if the children find out, who they've sort of got there on false pretenses now almost, their whole lives are just destroyed.
Pretty much. It's all about control. The word narcissist is bandied around.
Yeah.
I spent extended time in America on several occasions, 10 months, 6 months. And I dipped my toe back in the dating scene over there. And, I used to hear a lot saying, oh, my ex was a narcissist. And that word is thrown around a lot. And especially where parental alienation and false allegations are aired. I think everyone has a tiny bit of narcissism in them. I think being human in this day and age requires a small amount of that trait to survive, but it's when it gets out of hand. But I'm not a psychologist. I've done a lot of counselling myself to improve myself, as many people have, especially in this situation. But I think it goes deeper than narcissism. I don't think narcissist really describes false alligators and parental alienators. I just don't believe it describes them enough. Another word is sociopath.
Yes.
Split personality disorder, and you can move on from there. I've even heard people say schizophrenia, bipolar. Again, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm sort of only speaking from experience, but it boils down to they see the child as a possession.
Yep.
And it's basically, as with any possession, it comes down to control.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the key words is control. It's all about, I say this on Twitter all the time.
Yep.
When people, they're new into parental alienation, they're new into false allegations, and I'm like, you need to understand here, it is all about control.
Yep.
And once, control, and stemming from that, you said exactly the same words as I've used, revenge and vengeance.
Yeah. So when you was in the relationship with this person, was she controlling within the relationship towards yourself? I mean, I know you guys split up fairly quickly, didn't you? But was the reason that you split up because there was control over you prior to the split?
No, not overly. Not overly. My son's mother had a daughter from another guy, and he then had access, including overnights. But I understand his road to get there was very rocky. And when you meet someone, they tell you, pillow talk or whatever you want to call it. You tell them your story, they tell you your story, and you don't really have any reason not to believe them.
No.
But looking back now, I suspect that my son's stepsister, probably her father went through the same. And, she was telling me what a bad person he was. And, I don't doubt he was no angel, but I can certainly understand why he was like he was. Every time she wanted me to move in, it was like my gut feeling was telling me I shouldn't. And when I was packing up my unit, there was always something. She said to me, "You always create conflict so that you don't have to take the next step." So I guess my gut feeling was telling me something. And from my point of view, I was incredibly needy because my mum was and did die of lung cancer.
Yeah.
Back in the Channel Islands. So I was no way was I in a position to enter a relationship, and I freely admit I'm not very good at relationships. I learnt from my mother and father, although they stayed together, they were, that was, I don't know how, but they stayed together till they, both passed. But they weren't functional relationships, and that's where I learnt, and not very successfully, I may add. So in that respect, I have to take responsibility for my own past and actions.
And I think that's quite important as well. We all paint this picture that, we've been in cahoots with this false alligator, this, person who's potentially got bipolar or a psychopath or a sociopath or whatever. But ultimately, I think what makes us understand the situation better is when we can actually take a step back and say, yes, that person did do things wrong, but equally, there are things that I could have done better. And I think that's how we can rationalise it that little bit better than perhaps they can. So obviously, you was falsely accused. How did you go about clearing your name? Because the thing is, you was only in a relationship for a really short period of time, wasn't you?
Correct.
So, people who are in a relationship for a longer period are able to build the picture to undermine the case. They're able to show this person acts like this person acts like that. There might have been a message sent that suggested something didn't happen, etc. How did you clear your name?
Well, bearing in mind, the last time I saw my son, he had just turned 3. So when the false allegations came out, and this is where it gets, this is where it just doesn't equate. My son's mother said that my son had came home after a visit, and he was saying things like "Daddy lick bumhole." And various other things that wouldn't have been in a 2.5-year-old vocabulary.
No.
And the actions that she said he was doing.
Little
boys play with their willy. It's a fascination.
Does that ever go away?
Yes, look, exactly. And that's the very thing. These behaviours which are normal for little boys get sexualized, and oh God, Daddy must have done something to make him do that. But what I was told he said, he wouldn't have been capable of saying such things. And so in my case, he couldn't really be coached, and how did I clear my name? You know, sorry to digress.
It's okay. No.
When we left the court, the family court, I was told to contact this particular detective who worked in probably the sexual abuse unit. I'm not exactly sure what it was called. And I remember very clearly that I was hugely indignant. I think I was more indignant than angry and shocked and disappointed. So I called him and said, right, I want to come in and clear my name. And he said, well, I can't let you come in. One, it's a long weekend and we're closing shop. So you won't be able to come in until the long weekend is over. And it was a 4-day long weekend. And he said, also, you need to get legal advice. So I did get legal advice, and I was very lucky from the health club that I went to that I was friends with a very successful and very well-known criminal barrister. And he said to me, Mark, under no circumstances are you to go in and be questioned. He said, when you do, he said, the truth will be twisted. And he said, if I have to represent you, and he said, and I will do this pro bono, for a mate, he said it will make my job infinitely harder. He said they may come and arrest you, and he said if they do, go quietly. He said they will certainly, when they question you, he said they will rant and rave and shout at you. He said they may even get physical with you.
Jesus.
Just do not. He said just do not give anything away other than the mandatory information you have to give. And, he said, I do have to ask, as your legal representation, did you abuse your son? I said, no. And he said, I didn't think you did. But he said, I do have to ask because it would change how I represent you. So he said, I will call that detective now and let them know. And he said he made contact with the detective, but the detective didn't want to deal with him. And after the long weekend, when I called the detective, he said, right, are you coming in? And I said, no. And he said, why not? You were all keen. I said, yeah, but you told me to get legal advice. I got legal advice, and my legal advice is not to come in. And it started, do you know how bad this is going to look for you, etc., etc. And I said, listen, you must know that these allegations are false. I said, because they've come at a time when I'm seeking access. And he did say, well, that does happen.
Yeah. But
I said, I'm not coming in. And he got quite narky. And, as policemen are apt to do, seem to attract a certain type of individual that has a certain, or have certain personality traits. And, I said, listen, you know where I live. If you want to come and arrest me, come and arrest me.
Yeah.
And I said, that's really all I have to say. And he was going on. And in the end, I told him to F off. And he said, you can't tell me to F off. And I said, is this call being recorded? He said, yes. I said, right, I'm telling you again, F off. Know where I live. Otherwise, leave me alone. And I never, ever heard back from him again.
Wow.
Never interviewed. Not formally anyway. Only the conversation I told you, the two conversations. I then called the Department of Child Protection. They're not called that now, but that's what they were in those days. Had a couple of informal interviews with them over the phone. Whilst supervised visits were trying to be instigated, we were told that we had to have a single expert witness. I won't give the lady's name away, but she specialises in these types of cases.
Yeah.
And my son's mother got hers for nothing. I had to pay, I think, $1,500 for my part of the report that the court ordered. And we were interviewed separately, and we were interviewed with our son. So I was interviewed, my son's mother was interviewed, then I was interviewed with Tom, and she was interviewed with Tom. And my interview with Tom was on a Saturday the 17th, 2010. And I said to her, I'm actually going to walk away from Tom now because I don't believe this is in his best interest. One of us has to be an adult, and it's going to be me. I could see my son, even at that visit, was very withdrawn. You could see he was walking on eggshells.
Yeah, Tragic, absolutely tragic.
So I watched him disappear up the hallway, and that was it. Going back to the DCP, they didn't really ask a lot of questions, which leads me to believe they must have known that these allegations were false. I did ask how they interviewed my son, and I was told that because of his age, they couldn't directly ask, "Did Daddy abuse you?" So basically, she had him in a room on her own, this lady, and was just saying, "What, where do you live, and what do you do when you're at Daddy's house, and this and that." And I said, "Well, what was he like?" She said, "He talked about his mum, he talked about you, he talked about the toys he has at your house." And I said, "And how did he present?" And she said, "He didn't present as a boy who was anxious or nervous, which would suggest abuse." She said he was a very balanced little boy.
So, from all angles, really, clearly shown.
The most I got was a letter from the DCP stating, "Given that you denied abusing your son, the investigation is closed as we find the allegations of abuse unsubstantiated." So, short of telling you're innocent.
Yeah. Oh no, they'll never do that.
You have to go to a court of law to be found guilty or not guilty. But they that's as good as I've got. If I wanted, my ex-lawyer didn't say to me, she said, "Mark," she said, I'm shocked that the other parties pulled this." She said, "I'm truly shocked." But she said, "If you want to go to court to clear your name in court," she said, "you're going to have to allow probably $250,000. And she said, "That's not to say that the same won't happen next year."
Yeah.
Or the year after, or the year after.
Yeah.
And the older your son gets, the easier it is to coach him. So she said, I had a block of land then, which I had purchased, which was, near the ocean in a nice suburb in Mosman Park. And she said, "If you'd need to sell that to fund this." And I weighed everything up, and I thought she was right. I'll probably just keep going through this every year until she can try and make the allegation stick. So, as I say, the last time I saw my son was July 17, 2010, about 12:30.
So almost 10 years now. Very close.
10 years in July, yeah.
No matter how many stories I hear, it just, the depths of depravity that these people go to know no bounds. And I sit here as a dad, as a son, as a husband, as a brother, as an uncle, and wonder what's next. When will this madness ever end?
Well, even sitting there as a human being.
Yeah.
Take away gender. Even sitting there as a rational human being, it's false allegations are. When you're innocent, false allegations is I honestly can't think. False allegations against your child, and especially any child, but in my case, someone so young, and knowing that I'd been through a torrid childhood, that I'd been abused at nursery school, although it was a couple of isolated incidents, it's abhorrent. It cuts to your very core. It attacks your. It attacks that very core goodness that you have.
Yes.
This little boy depended on both of us. But when he was in my care, he depended on me to look after him, to take care of him, and to show him the love and affection that I never got as a child. And to have something like that leveled against you is oh my God, I think you could go to prison and be bashed up by gangs and beaten, and it would have nothing on false allegations.
No. And a friend and I talked about this in an early sort of intro episode. But a friend and I had a conversation once, and we said how you can be convicted of murder, and you can come out and, it could have been a case of, oh, do you know what, that person who he murdered, you was going through a really bad time, you had a really bad childhood, you found whatever in jail that's put you on the straight and narrow, or it could have been that you was out on a Friday night, you'd had a drink, somebody started on you, you punched them, and they fell back and hit their head and died. The point is, quite often people will come out of, not quite often, but it can happen that people will, there was a terrorist attack in London a few weeks ago, and it was stopped by somebody who had been convicted of murder and was at the conference that the terrorist was at. And he was then hailed a hero. But you can guarantee if that person was there because he was a paedophile or he was a rapist, whether or not it was a false allegation, he wouldn't have been called a hero. You can come back from murder is the point, but because, as you said yourself, a false allegation like this attacks the very core of your humanity and of your goodness, there just isn't any coming back. And that's why I refer to it as a nuclear option. There is just no coming back from it, is there?
Not really. You've hit the nail on the head. And I do remember that terrorist attack. I mean, the guy copped a bit of flack, but generally he was hailed as a hero.
Yeah.
Look at, what was the actor from EastEnders? Was it Leslie Grantham? And
yep.
He's a murderer. And, he came back and was very successful. And you're exactly right. You can murder someone and you can come out of prison and people will say, well, good on him. He's turned his life around.
Yep.
You've taken another life or multiple lives even. But when it comes to false allegations, it's just like throwing a dart blindly at a dartboard, and it sticks and it will forever stick. It's
once that hole has been made in that dartboard, it doesn't go away, does it?
No, it doesn't. And some people will say, well, there's no smoke without fire. And you're like, well, hang on, that's, there's a presumption of innocence in most countries. The law is the presumption of innocence. Australia has the Westminster system of law. Probably Canada has something very similar, and Europe, America has a slightly different system. But generally speaking, there's the presumption of innocence.
Yeah.
However, once you step into the family court, that's not the case.
No.
False allegations are aired. I remember saying to the judge, but I could see him raise his eyebrows, and I said, come on, these are absolutely false. And he said, I can't make that determination. He said, it would be remiss of me to do that. He said, I have to cut contact with, between you and your son until such time as this can be investigated and supervised visits can be instigated. And this is where it comes down to the money-making machine, because once you have supervised visits, these were costing me anywhere from $120 to $150 a time.
Yep.
On top of my child support, which was always over $1,000, sometimes up around $1,500, $1,600 a month.
Yeah.
And there we have a stranger following us around. I couldn't take Tom back to my unit, which he loved, where all his toys were. We always had to be in public. Luckily there was a big play area that had been set up for kids and mothers, but I was normally the only dad there among all these mums, with some older lady following us around. Luckily Tom was fairly oblivious to this, but it was the lady who had to drop him off there, or sometimes it would be his mother. But it was just, I think about my poor little boy going through this. He wanted to go to the toilet. She had to come with us. It was just the sexualization of all this. I'd always taught my son when he was small, you know, when a man goes to the toilet, bloody dribbles are the bane of his life. And so as a little boy, I always taught my son to get a square of toilet roll, wipe the end of his willy, put it in, and, you know, make sure he was dry.
Yeah.
You know, even the issue, oh, why is he's got to call it his penis? No, when I grew up, it was called a willy. He knows what a willy is. He knows what a penis is. That's fine. You know, we stick to our own terminology.
Exactly, yeah.
But this has got to stop. He's not to wipe the end of his willy with toilet roll.
What?
I honestly, you know, I just used to sit there and think, what more rubbish could be thrown at me? How much more, you know, how much deeper have I got to dig to try and get through this? And I thought with the allegations, when you know, people say you walked out on your son, you know, they don't ask, they never look at why, and they never look that I actually did it for best interest of my son. And even the psychologist who wrote the ultimate report for the court even agreed that whilst not the best outcome, it's probably the better outcome at the moment.
Yeah.
And the son needs to be told that at some stage that, you know, the father did this for him, not because the father was a bad father or a bad person. And I would make that decision any day of the week again, because I was the only one who had Tom's best interest at heart here. And I'll never deviate from that, no matter what people throw around and say, oh, you're a bad father for doing that. No, I was a good father. I was the one who actually, in fact, I was a good parent, not a good father. I was the better parent who stepped away to stop putting, you know, our little boy through this.
And yet, no doubt, throughout this, the fact that you walked away in order to protect your son will be used as a tool to beat your character with, to assassinate you with, to put you down with. There is just no winning, is there?
No, that and several others, and that's assuming, you know, people always think that there's going to be a happy reunion. You know, trust me, there's not. As you would have found out. I'm in contact with people who've been alienated for 44 years. One lady in particular, Dawn, she posted a video on Twitter and Facebook of her reunion of 4 years ago. She got 2 years with her father before he died. He passed away.
Horrendous.
Some, you know, I'm in contact on multiple forums with parents who just don't see their kids again. They believe the other party, and that's the end of it.
Yeah.
So when people say he'll come and find you when he's older, I'm always very skeptical. You know, almost flippant, because it's even if he did, has too much damage been done. Much water gone up to the bridge. You know, I actually have an older son who's an adult. I think he'd be 30 now. And I didn't know about him until he was 26 years old. I had a one-night stand, and his mother didn't tell me about him, although we lived in the same village for the first 7 years of this boy's life. And to Australia, he contacted me, and because I didn't see him born, I didn't have an emotional connection there. Where I saw my little boy Tom born. You know, so there was a huge connection. But with Andrew, we're not in contact. We can't make it work. I spent, you know, probably 10 grand on him trying to help him get set up in business, and he just got bored and walked away. And you know, not that it was all about money, but you know, he had a very troublesome childhood. He was always told his dad lived in Australia, and you know, fair play for him. Tracking me down, but there was no happy ending there.
And I think that's the hardest thing for a lot of us to sort of rationalise at times. It's all very romantic, isn't it, to say, oh well, there's going to be this amazing reunion, and yeah, we all want it to happen, of course we do. But I mean, you know, you're 10 years in, I'm 8 years in, and you know, you and I have both walked away for the kids ultimately. and if we stay and fight, it's used against us. And if we walk away in order to sort of pull them out of that conflict zone, it's used against us. Things have to change, and I keep saying it, but I do hope that this is going to be, in some part, a tiny catalyst to get things to change. But things desperately need to change. They really, really do. And I appreciate people have been going on about it for years and years and years. But this is people's lives, isn't it? Enough's enough. So, talking about lives, how's yours now?
Well, thanks for asking. Initially, I got on with my life. The first year there was a shock, but I got on with my life. I continued with my consulting. I built something approaching my dream home. I carried on going to the gym. I had my ups and downs, but generally speaking, my life was good. I earned good money. I was working in Laos, I was working in Papua New Guinea, I was working all over Western Australia. I had a good name with my consulting business. I was never really short of work, apart from when the GFC hit. But when I look back now, there was such the decline in my mental health was very subtle and very, the incline was very shallow at that time. So it really crept up on me, but not that I would notice. And come around 2013, I'd finished a contract in Laos, and I thought, I need to take time off. I need to finish my home so I can rent that out, and I want to go and visit friends in America and maybe do some volunteer work in Peru.
Yeah.
And I finished my home. I rented it out funny enough, to an American couple, and I took off to the US in December 13. And I hooked up with people I'd met online and stayed with them. And I still wanted to go to Peru. And I was messing around online on Craigslist, and I got talking to an English girl living in Boulder, Colorado. And we were talking, and she said, come to Boulder. And I was like, yeah, okay, why not? It's mountainous. I like the mountains. And Peru went out the window, and she met someone, but she said, still come to Boulder. I'll help you get set up. And that's one of the happiest times of my life, since the allegations. I spent 7 months in Boulder and 10 months all up in the US. And, I climbed, I met so many good people in Boulder. Then I thought, that's it. I need to get out of Australia. So I went back to Australia. I sold up, finished up what I needed to do there. But it was like treacle. It was always like I was on a bungee cord. Just when it looked like I could leave, I was pulled back. And eventually I did leave. I came back to Jersey in April 15. But my mental health was declining quite significantly then. Lots of suicidal thoughts. My physical health was being affected as well. And my father died in March 2016. I nursed him for a year. I used to go and see him almost daily. And we made up because we never had a particularly good childhood, or I never had a good relationship. We never had a good relationship when I was growing up. So we put all those ills to bed and made up, and I think that was a really good thing for us. And he always used to ask me, when am I going to see my grandson? And, till the day he died, I had to keep saying, it's just not going to happen, Dad. And he kept saying to me, why would someone do that? And I was like, that's the $1 million question, Dad. I can't answer that. And I took off. My friend said to me, a couple of them said, right, you've done the right thing by your dad. What will make you happy? And I said, to go back to Boulder and see my friends and go climbing the mountains again. They said, right, book your flight and go. And I did. And one of my good friends picked me up, and I spent another beautiful 6 months in Boulder, Colorado. I was on antidepressants then, Zoloft or sertraline, but I remember waking up with very, very dark thoughts, and I did some reading and I found out that the SSRI meds actually can exacerbate your issue. And so I stopped taking them cold turkey, and I still had a really great 6 months in Boulder. It's definitely my happy place. But when I came back, although I had some enthusiasm for life, since then, 2000, summer 2018, I found myself standing under a tree with a rope around my neck. And I still keep that noose. I still keep that just in case I need it. And suicidal thoughts very regularly. It's extremely hard to find a reason to go on, really. I back on antidepressants, the old school ones. I had to go on TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, to get my hormones and my testosterone levels where they need to be, so I can actually, get back on track physically. And
Yeah.
they've worked. What a revelation TRT is. And, just trying to find projects to keep me, going. I'm on benefits at the moment. I'm just not capable of working because of mental ill health. So it's mostly been a steady decline, and I hate to sound negative, and you just try and find positives every day to try and to keep going. Some days you just can't get out of bed. It's almost like you're paralyzed with fear and indecision. And the one project that springs to mind is that I think lawyers need to be held to account. I think lawyers, and I can only speak for Australia because that's where my issues took place, but I think lawyers need to be held to account. I think false allegations are becoming the strategy of choice for family court legal practitioners, and I think that's one of the areas that needs to be looked at. And I will get back in touch with you at some stage, because I'm just putting the finishing touches now to a procedure and a questionnaire to collect data to either prove or disprove that this is the case. And basically, to me, it revolves around whether that's their strategy of choice. My gut feeling it is, and it's become normal operating or standard operating procedure.
It certainly seems that way, doesn't it?
And something needs to be done. As we all know, the family court is one big money-making machine, and this is why it's so hard to get change, because it's like trying to interrupt Big Pharma or trying to interrupt or disrupt Amazon. It's taking on a life of itself because it's a multi-billion-pound or dollar industry. The lawyers, all these specialist reports that are needed, even the people who supervise visits once false allegations have been made, everyone's got their hand in your pocket. It's so
true. So true.
And that's what's got to be disrupted. If lawyers can be pulled into line, whether they're regulated by their own body. I've already reported, I was the applicant, so I've reported the respondent's lawyer, and I got something back saying, well, even if she was acting on her client's behalf, well, there's not much we can do. But they can recuse themselves from the case. That is an option for them. If their client's behaviour, let's just say for argument's sake, their lawyer comes in and says, I want to use false allegations, if they believe that to be true, or untrue, should I say, then they can recuse themselves and say, or talk them out of it and say, no, that's conduct contrary to the court and what's best interest in your child. But these lawyers never do, because it's just a money-making machine.
It is money, yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And as somebody who had to pay for family court and all the jazz that went with it against somebody who got it all for free. I ended up with a bill of £25,000, which I think is about, I don't know, probably about 40,000 Australian dollars, I would imagine. I'm guessing, roughly. Because purely it was a case of, let's drag it on, let's do this extra, let's do that extra. And like you say, when you start getting ahead, I mean, I don't want to use that terminology, but that's when things, the false allegations come out and the nuclear option, and then everybody else has got the hand in the trough, haven't they? And so it goes from there. So
absolutely, it is. Everyone's got their hand in the trough, and with lawyers, I spent about 25k Australian, and in the end, I didn't think they were doing for me what they should. And they used to address their letters to the other party as dear colleagues, and I'm thinking,
wow.
Well, they're not colleagues. They're at this moment in time, they're my sworn enemy.
Yeah.
They're preventing me from having not what I deserve, but what my son deserves, to have a relationship with both parents. And
I mean, it's not even just deserves, it's what should be the basic human right of a child. Unless there is a genuine reason not to, that child has a basic human right to have contact with both of its parents.
Look, absolutely, and 50-50 should be the starting point, not something to work up to.
Yeah. In
my case, it would never have been 50-50 because of my rosters, but that's fine. I had no issue with that. No. I understood that. I never wanted to take my son away from his mother. I just wanted overnights and more time than I was getting. But therein lies the problem. The family court, the currency is conflict. The family court does not work. Resolution doesn't generate income.
Nope.
Only conflict. The currency is conflict. That is the only thing that generates income. And that is why it's in their best interest to keep these relationships fractured.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely spot on. You absolutely are. So let's look to finish this off now. So one of the questions I do have for yourself and every guest that I have on is, if one of your friends was falsely accused, what would you say to them? What advice would you give to them?
That's an extremely difficult question, because it depends under what circumstances.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
The allegations are made, but let's say in my case it was because of the family court. My first inclination would be to say, you do need to clear your name for your own good. Probably take a step back. Don't get drawn into just throwing money at a lawyer. Try and let the system work for you. And probably the key piece of advice, which is probably counterintuitive to a lot of people as it was to me at the time, but say nothing to the police.
Yeah.
You're innocent, that's fine. But say nothing to the police, because I had a very good friend of mine who was falsely accused under different circumstances, and his lawyer said exactly the same. The minute that you start talking to the police, so they'll come to you and say, on such and such a date, you abused your little boy. So you go back and say, well, that's rubbish because I was working remote location then. So then they go back to the other party and say, oh, you sure it couldn't have been on his time off? Oh, yeah, maybe it was. So
let's see how we can make this story fit.
Yeah, never let the truth get in the way of a good conviction.
Yeah.
So my advice to anyone, absolutely anyone who has been falsely accused, say nothing to the police. Apart from your name, address, date of birth, and I think it's occupation, say nothing. Because if you say nothing, they've got nothing to use against you. Otherwise, it will be a case of you hanging yourself. And, my criminal barrister friend and several others have said, they've got murderers off. and they've said to me, irrespective of the morality of it, because when someone comes to us as a lawyer, we have to represent them. That's our code of ethics.
Yeah.
But they say to anyone, whatever the case, say nothing, because it just makes our job infinitely harder if you start spilling your guts up front, under caution. Anything that's said that's not been under caution is almost irrelevant anyway and can't be used. But once they start wanting to talk to you under caution, say absolutely nothing. I know it's counterintuitive, and a lot of people will look at that and say, so what have you got to hide?
What have you got to hide, yeah.
Well, you have nothing to hide. It's your presumption of innocence, and that's what people need to remember, that all these Western systems of law are built on the presumption of innocence. And once false allegations are made, and even if they're made in the family court, although it continues to be a family court issue, these then become criminal proceedings, which is that is most definitely where the presumption of innocence comes in. So I really can't stress that enough. And I absolutely know it's counterintuitive, because you want to clear your name, but say absolutely nothing. I hate to tell people to get legal representation, because that sets them on a path where they're going to almost bankrupt themselves. But sometimes they have no choice. Once they've proved their innocence, then they can start moving on. In my case, I was never even charged. That's how bogus these things.
Just insane, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely crazy.
Insane is a very, very, very apt description.
It really is. And the more people that I talk to and the more people that I network with, the more insane things become. At times during your interview today, I've sat here with my head in my hands and I've just thought to myself, how have we got to this point as a society? What are we doing? And it blows the mind. It really does. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure. The only other question, and I am gonna publish these questions, but the only other question I would normally ask is, what would you suggest to the government or president of the country that you reside in on how to change this? But you've pretty much covered that with regards to, the problem is the money pit, isn't it? Money is the root of all evils, especially in situations like this. And I think if money was taken out, both from the legal point of view and being offered as compensation to somebody that just has to say that they was abused, I think things would change, and change very rapidly.
I do agree. I think what needs to be done is where allegations are made, certainly in the family court, there needs to be rapid response. That the response needs to be very rapid and very decisive. Otherwise, the more time that the accused parent and the child go without seeing each other, it plays. As a social worker said to me, time is the enemy of the targeted parent, but the friend of the alienating parent. And that is so true, because the more time that passes without contact with your child, then they start coming in saying, we need to reintroduce the targeted parent and child. And therein is another money pit, because it all has to be supervised.
Yeah.
It's, like I say, they've got your hand in your pocket every step of the way. Every turn, there's a hand in your pocket. There needs to be a very rapid response for false allegations.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Perhaps pleasure's the wrong word with the subject being as it is, but it's been good to talk to you. It's been good to hear your story. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
No, look, thanks for having me on your show. I will be in touch. I don't know how many of your listeners are in Australia, but I will certainly be back in touch with you once I have my project up and running, and hopefully there will be a way of promoting that if even through your website or whatever, and it may come to nothing, but I would hope that at least I get some responses so we can see how entrenched this the strategy of false allegations is for these lawyers, and hopefully, we can let them know we're on to them and everyone else is on to them.
And hopefully enact some sort of change. Looking at the statistics, because that's a question I've never been asked before, we have 3% of our audience in Australia. So whilst it's not huge, it does show that we have an audience there. So yeah, let's promote that for you, absolutely.
I mean, would you have an issue with me putting this on my, I think I have about 1,400 Twitter followers now, so I'm quite happy to say that I've been interviewed by yourself, and if anyone's got any, got a story surrounding false allegations, to get in touch.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant. Yeah, no, I'd appreciate that greatly.
If you can message me your email address,
yeah.
I can. I'll happily do that. I think we all need to stick together in this, and I'm always happy to promote.
Fabulous, thank you very much. I hope your Saturday gets a little bit better than it has been, and I hope you have a lovely weekend.
And likewise, my friend, I can hear your family in the background. So you going in?
Yes, they're all going a little bit crazy at the moment, I'm afraid. But it's been a pleasure. You take care of yourself and have a wonderful weekend.
Likewise, take care.
Take care. Thank you.